The Community Oversight Task Force of Nevada County is a group of citizens who work to enhance accountability and transparency in policing practices, policies, and training to help build community trust through civilian oversight. We work to ensure local law enforcement agencies act lawfully, are fully trained in accordance with police officer standards and training, act without bias, and are respectful of the public they serve. As part of our mission, we will make our findings available to local police agencies, to our local government bodies, and to the public. We may also make recommendations for structuring and funding systems to better serve the needs and safety of our community, including homeless and mentally ill. So with that, we'll start our program.
And I am Lorraine Reich. I'm a local attorney and mediator. I've been serving the community for over 30 years here in Grass Valley, Nevada City. And my expertise was not in law enforcement. It's been in family law and estate planning. But since my semi-retirement, I've gotten involved in various activism. And lately, I have joined the Community Oversight Task Force to delve into police training and practices here in Nevada County. So, as Polly said, the impetus for this group were these various events. I was particularly upset when I saw the videos and listened to accounts of the August 9, 2020 Black Lives Matter protest in Nevada City, because it appeared that, first of all, there was no crowd control. Even though police came to monitor the march, which was unpermitted, it's true. Had these folks gotten a permit, there would have been more police presence, probably. But it's questionable whether they would have done anything differently, because what we saw was really quite appalling. We saw a peaceful demonstration against police brutality across the United States, very much in keeping with what has been going on across the United States with the Black Lives Matter movement, which is basically saying black and people of color are being targeted by police in all kinds of communities and cities across the United States. And there has been many accounts of brutality and death, and we've seen them on our news at night. So our local Black Lives Matter groups, which have people of color, a lot of younger people are involved with them, as I understand, and they have been holding marches in keeping with the rest of the nation for the last few years. But the last one was August 9 of 2020, and because what happened there has certainly had a chilling effect on our local Black Lives Matter activists. There hasn't been any further march or protest in Nevada County since August 9 of 2020. There have been a couple vigils, but that's not a protest. It's different. So what we saw that day were the protesters. Well, actually, we're going to bring Tara up in a few minutes, and she's going to describe what she saw because she was actually present. But my job in this task force was essentially to obtain public records on police training and police education. So in my naivety, I sent out a public records request to the Sheriff's Department, Sheriff's Office, and I asked for 3 pages of records on the deputies, their educational backgrounds, their training backgrounds, whether they had been the subject of citizen complaints, whether they had a disciplinary record, and items of that sort. And I came to learn the hard way, that is through county council telling me that, sorry, the law doesn't allow that. The law prohibits, or actually the law protects police records as personnel records, and they are held to be confidential. I was pretty much amazed at that training records would be held confidential. But at any rate, the law is such that all police records are essentially considered personnel records and confidential. However, there's been a change of that in 2018. The California legislature enacted Penal Code 832.7, which created an exception to the exemptions set forth in the government code on public records disclosure. So now the public is entitled to receive records on the use and or discharge of a firearm by a police officer against a member of the public. And number 2, the police officer conduct that results in great bodily injury. 3, a sustained finding that a police officer engaged in sexual misconduct. 4, a sustained finding that a peace officer was dishonest in the reporting, investigation, or prosecution of a crime, or the misconduct of a person or another peace officer. So those records are subject to disclosure, and in our world of Nevada County, that essentially means that we're entitled to all of the records that pertain to the Gabriel Strickland shooting and the Sage Crawford shooting when the investigations are done. The Gabriel Strickland shooting investigation is done, and we have been getting records from the police, the sheriff's department on that. We will be having another program on the sheriff's office records and our experience with the sheriff's office. So we were, however, successful in getting the police training records from peace officers standards and training, and that is the state entity that produces the policies and practices for training and trainings curriculum for peace officers as legislated by the California State Assembly and Senate. In reading the law, we know that police officers in California are required to be trained in racial and cultural diversity, in de-escalation techniques, excessive use of force, and now less than excessive use of force training, bias training, dispute resolution, crowd control, and civil disobedience training. Post produces some of the trainings that cover these items, but not all, apparently. We learned that, yes, now this graph actually shows Nevada City Police officers, not by name, but by initials. And in going through their training records that we received from Post, this is what we discovered. That in fact, most of them had not had the training in, I can't read the categories here, civil disobedience. That means understanding what is civil rights with respect to demonstrations, protests, rallies, First Amendment rights of speech, and protest. That our Nevada City Police are not trained specifically with respect to that. The law requires that our peace officers be trained with respect to dealing with the developmentally disabled or mentally ill individuals, because that requires special training and special treatment. And we found that only a few had received that training, and the years that they received them are listed up there on that chart, which I don't think you can see. Hate crimes. What we experienced on August the 9th of 2020, in my view, were in fact hate crimes. We had, there was a contingent of people who arrived at the Black Lives Matter protest who were not there to be part of the protest, but who were there to say that they were opposed to the Black Lives Matter protests. In other words, it sounded like their message was racist, and they were definitely aggressive as they took people down to the ground, as they threw their phones around. Again, we'll have an eyewitness account here when Itera speaks. But hate crimes is the law. There's a law in California that prohibits certain kind of conduct. Or you can look up the Penal Code section yourself, just Google it. California Penal Code section 422.6. A says no person, whether or not acting under color of law, that means as a police officer, shall by force or threat of force willfully injure, intimidate, interfere with, oppress, or threaten any other person in the free exercise or enjoyment of any right or privilege secured to him or her by the Constitution of this state or the Constitution of the United States. Okay, that's basically it. In other words, what the demonstrators were doing that day was protected activity under the First Amendment. And the people who showed up, who clearly were there to disrupt and to disrupt the demonstration, they were committing this crime. They were intimidating, they were forcefully injuring, they were taking people's personal property, etc., etc. Yet, going back to the slide with the training, our police in Nevada City don't seem to be well trained in that category, because there's only been one in 2008 who had that training. And that person, by the way, was our newly hired chief named Ted Steck. He has lots of training, but he's a veteran police officer. He's been a police officer for decades, and he was recently hired. As a result of the events of August 9, as we all know, the city council ordered an investigation, and the company that they had provide the investigation was a company called Paragon Investigative Services. Well, I looked into who is Paragon, and Paragon is a group who is, the CEO is a man by the name of Alan Huggins, who is a long-term, decades-long veteran of law enforcement. And on his website he says that he's reviewed tens of thousands of police reports for accuracy and content. He's also spent well over a decade investigating the actions of officers, both as professional standards unit commander and as a private investigator, contracting with cities, counties, and educational institutions throughout the United States. He knows what to look for in police reports and actions and how to get the most out of witnesses through interviews. The focus of that company is to determine whether or not police have committed crime in the course of their work, in the course of their investigations on specific crimes or whatever in that context. So the conclusion of the Nevada City report was that no law officer broke the law. Well, they didn't break the law, they just didn't they didn't comply with the law. Nor did they, this report didn't go into whether any other person committed any crime, which I contend they did. So at any rate, we were very unhappy with that report. It was really came up with a big nothing. They did conclude that that the Nevada City Police lacked training, and they lacked training in crowd control. Well, that was about as evident as the nose on your face. So we're, some of us are concerned that there could be elements of racism and bigotry even within our ranks of the police department because of what we saw. We saw them walking with these aggressors, and I wasn't there, but I've heard people say that it appeared as though they were siding with those people. So we're not here tonight to call out any bigotry or racism among our police force, but we're concerned, and we think that our city government, our city council, may want to dive into who they are hiring as the police chief and what training they're getting, and maybe a little bit more in depth about who their police officers are. I want to say that we also discovered in our records request that Nevada City does not keep any records of the dispatch calls. So when people call 911 in Nevada City, it may be for a medical emergency, it may be for a mental health crisis, it may be for a crime, It may be for a domestic violence problem, but Nevada City does not keep records to categorize the numbers of calls. So we're concerned about that. We want Nevada City to do that so we can monitor if our police department is addressing the needs of the community. In conclusion, I want to say that our city council is the local government of Nevada City, and they act as if they're beholden to the police department instead of the other way around. They are actually the people in charge. They're in charge of hiring police chiefs, and there's been 3 in this last, year or 18 months or so. And they delegate all of this training and all of the particulars about police activity to the chief, but they need to monitor the police chief. You know, I don't think there's been any monitoring of these past chiefs because look at these records. You don't have people being adequately trained. So we're asking that our city government demand transparency and training of our local officers, that they make the training records public, and that they demand greater accountability. And finally, that hate crimes be prosecuted. All right, thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Itira, and Rick knows what slide I'm on. So that's, and Lorraine said a lot of what happened, and part of why I got interested in this task force was that I was a social worker and I ran a group home for autistic adults, and we were given a thing called professional assault response training. And so no matter how big our clients were, some of them 6 feet, and they were aggressive and violent, and some nonverbal. So we were, unless you knew what to do, you might get bitten or beaten up yourself. And so we learned how to get behind a person who was going to be aggressive and hang on to their belt until that person calmed down and we were able to take further action. And so that's one of the interests of mine, is that why are not police officers able to employ some of these peaceful strategies for getting somebody under control that looks like they might get aggressive? And I'm not saying anything about the police in general, I'm just saying there are times when I wonder, because we were trained in how to do this, and so that's one of my interests. The other interest is we thought we were going to get reports about what happened August 9th, and it turns out the police don't write reports, which blew our mind, of course. And so who writes the report is this guy that interviews them and decides what of what they say will go in the report. So since Lorraine brought it up, the report is in the union, which you can look at yourself, but it's, if it weren't so serious, it'd be hysterical. It's all about how the police didn't commit a crime, but could use more training, and how the Black Lives Matter people were just as bad as the other people, which wasn't really true. So just a few. I'm not going to get into everything that happened. You can look up on YouTube the August 9th event. You can see the demonstrators, you can see what the police did, you can see what the sheriff did. All of that's recorded for you in great detail, so it's pretty dramatic. So I hope, if you haven't seen it, that you will, just because it will give you some grounding in why we were so upset. Okay. So I was part of the Black Lives Matter walk. We arrived at that parking lot in Nevada City that I think is by Luna's, I'm not sure, but it's a big public parking lot, and we went from there and marched in some of the neighborhood. And when we got back to Broad Street, there was a line of guys with flag poles and other types of stuff indicating their preference for, hi, come on down. Just sort of like standing there like, okay, let's see if you can pass us, we're the tough guys. So we marched up into that line, and then we just were following the leader. That was part of what we were doing, was supporting the youth who were organizing a Black Lives Movement march in a neighborhood. And part of the reason it was in this neighborhood was that we had begun to be harassed on Sutton and Brunswick by the Black Lives Matter opposition. And they carried all sorts of flags, don't tread on me, and so on and so forth. And so we quit going to that corner, and so going to Nevada City was a way to just avoid completely being in the presence of this group. So when we got in front of this group, the group of guys with their sticks began to take people's signs, rip them up, took their phones, threw their phones, pushed people, pushed kids. I saw some mother go after one of these guys, and maybe that's where the Black Lives Matter people got a bad name, because the mother was upset that one of these racist aggressors pushed her daughter down. Okay, she didn't like that. So she went after like a mama bear, this guy. I was like, whoa, that was pretty brave. Meanwhile, the police had arrived, and their car was behind this line of guys, and the police officer was standing in front of the car just watching what was going on. And so some of these, and we call them racist aggressors, because they were saying Black lives don't matter, and you should go home, and they thought we were bussed in from out of town, and that we were going to burn down Nevada City, which was obviously we weren't. Obviously this was ridiculous. So, but they had it in their minds this was a group to be destroyed, and so they were poking us with their sticks, with their flags, and all this. So at a certain point, the Black Lives Matter march continued through these people. And as a result of that, there were people that were getting singled out in the crowd by the aggressors. But also, so there was this long string of people hoping to regroup beyond them. And once they got beyond them, they resumed their march, and these guys followed behind and were pushing and doing other stuff. Meanwhile, the police never said, why don't you guys stand over here and the other group stand over there? They made no attempt to get in their car to say, this is how it goes. I mean, we have one side here and one side there, and that's just the way it is. And I don't know anybody that wouldn't have followed their direction at the time. The people that were the aggressors clearly thought and said that the police were on their side, and they would have done anything that the police told them to do. They were not against the police at all that day. And they had their blue, stripy flags and things like that. So there wasn't anybody that wouldn't have listened to the police officer at the time. But they made no attempt to just even try it, to just say, we want this group over here and that group over there. That never happened. As far as the police were so overwhelmed because there were so many people, it was maybe 100 altogether, including the aggressive people. And so there was really a scary crowd. But they pretended that there was only 3 of them and they wouldn't be able to do anything because there was only 3 police officers that were paid by the city of Nevada City. So they claimed they didn't know about this march, but they did know about this march, they admitted later. And the reason that they didn't get more people was because we had had a peaceful march since the George Floyd murder, which I believe was in May of 2020. And so because of that, they weren't alarmed that we were going to have another march through the neighborhood, and so we weren't alarmed. Everybody was feeling pretty safe at that point. But this event really changed things, and as a group, we were really concerned that we didn't want to put any people at risk. We didn't want kids being attacked by these guys. It was pretty outrageous. So when we asked the police to please intervene on some of the aggression that was going on, the police officer told us to fill out a report and kind of turned their back and walked away. And that was true even for the city council member, Daniela Fernandez, asked the policeman directly, would you please intervene? And he told her to fill out a report. Wow, that was really a shock to me. Like, whatever, So there we were, and then and so now we're in the situation where we would be putting people at risk, and so we have not had a demonstration since then. That's not to say that we wouldn't, but that's the situation at this point. It's like we said, 3 police officers showed up, and they claimed that they didn't have any backup. They just were so helpless. First of all, I've never seen a helpless police officer in my life. I've seen them pull over people from the street, say, "Hey, you, pull over." And I've seen people pull over when the policeman points to where they're supposed to go. So I'm sure if a police officer said what to do, people would do it, but that didn't happen. And then they wandered around. The police officers were not organizing with each other, and there were other backup police officers. There was a sheriff's department. There were at least 2 cars driving around, and also Grass Valley police were available, but the story that they were so overwhelmed that they couldn't possibly do anything is not true. So that was a big part of their report, and again, you can read that in the Union. It's if I had more time, I'd read it to you now, because it's I've always wanted to be a stand-up comic, and that would really give me the material that you all would be laughing your heads off if you heard what they said about this event, which was totally off the wall. And I think they had no backup, and the police did not report the events accurately, obviously. And so all of these things we started getting really concerned. What the heck is going on? And what about these people who were assaulting the Black Lives Matter people? So all in all, there were several who were punching Black Lives Matter people, pushing kids down, destroying property, doing all of the blocking and all of the violation of civil rights that Lorraine talked about. And one guy was arrested, and his name is James S. Smith, okay? And his trial was in January. I have no idea what happened. I've been trying to get through to the district attorney. I couldn't remember his name. And so since I found it, their lines were too busy and I couldn't get through. But out of all of that, the other thing that we're interested in is what happens to these cases. We hear about things that happen, and then we hear no follow-up. So, and sometimes we don't even hear what's happening with this guy, John, who was murdered the other day, and there was no police report. We don't know what's going on with that, but at any rate, so this is a concern too, that we have no follow-up. There's no place to really get what happened after these events. What happened to the people who were assaulted? What happened to so I happen to know that some of the people that were assaulted showed pictures of who assaulted them. As a result of that, these guys showed up at their house, and they had to move. So they were scared out of their minds. And that happened to a couple of people who actually made a report and put their name on the report. Those people were tracked down by the, I call them hooligans, but somebody said, no, let's just call it what it is, racist disruptors or racist aggressors. I think of it as a hooligan, as a person that's just, had a beer and gone down to mess with people, and that's what they were doing, messing with us for sure. So that was part of my day, and then I talked to other people who were, and I had to stop marching for a while because of a physical condition. I had a plantar fasciitis attack, so I couldn't continue. But some of the other people I asked, did you get help later from the police? No, that didn't happen, as they were going through the neighborhood trying to get back to the parking lot. So people were there in the parking lot gathered to help escort each other out of the event. And I'm happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk about it later after our show here. So thank you.
My name is Rick Robbins. I don't even remember how I got involved in this, but it's something I'm interested in. Obviously, we're talking about some of our concerns about whether the police department is actually policing, but there's another issue, and is whether we're getting our money's worth. And Nevada City is a particular case just because it's such a small community. I've listed here Nevada City, Grass Valley, Auburn, and then some of the other cities in California to compare the various ratios of the cost of policing versus the population and so on. This is population. Nevada City only has 3,100 people, and Grass Valley's around 13,000. Auburn's about 14,000. And you can see here that the police budget for Nevada City is $593 per person versus, say, Grass Valley at $320. And then if you come down here to, say, Alhambra, some of the bigger cities, they're in the $400 area. The biggest cities might be even under $200. So obviously size of the community has something to do with it. The number of officers per resident, number of residents per officer rather, there's 286 residents per officer in Nevada City, but that can range all the way up to around 2,000. Again, has something to do with the number of people in the community, but also it's a question of hiring practices and deciding how you want to spend your money. And finally, the police budget is the percent of the total city budget. You can see here that Nevada City is at 46.8%, and it ranges, even some of the, Grass Valley at 31, Auburn's at about 36. Generally, they're in the 30s, so we're paying another 15% more as a portion of the total budget. So we're not saying necessarily that we need to do something, but it's something that needs to start to be considered. Is this the right way to do it? Should we have a police department of our own? Should we hire it out? Is the police department too big, too small? Is it being operated in a way that's efficient? And that's some of the things that we'll start looking into and maybe make some proposals in the future.
One of the things we learned is that across the country, people are reevaluating whether their police budgets are really meeting the needs of their community, and so various cities are doing different things, and so we picked a couple to talk to you about. My favorite is called CAHOOTS, and that stands for Crisis Assistance Helping Out on the Street, and that happens in Eugene, Oregon, and they've been in operation since 31 years. They've been doing this, which is a group of people that's been farsighted, have figured out a way to support their police department by taking over all the calls having to do with mental illness, having to do with homelessness, having to do with drugs. And so this is taken on by a company called White Bird Clinic. And so they send out their therapists. They're dispatched through the police department, and I guess the dispatcher makes that call. Is this going to be a mental health call, or is this going to be a law enforcement call? So it's pretty exciting that this program is very successful and has saved their city millions of dollars by operating a task force that goes out instead of armed officers to take care of people and then redirect them from jail, and that sort of result into like a mental health center or mental health support services, things of that nature. So it's pretty exciting that we have a program that's been going on long enough for us to really have a good look at all the details and how it works and how it supports the police as well as the community, and hopefully save lives. I mean, we've had 2 incidents of mentally ill people freaking out on the police, and the police just killed them. And then the discussion is, well, whether they should have or shouldn't have killed them, So that's not where we want to be. Where we want to be is that person was helped to a mental health facility and is still alive today. That's where we want to be. San Francisco also has a program, and it's called SCRT, which is Street Crisis Response Team. And they're a partnership between the Department of Public Health, the Fire Department, and the Department of Emergency Management. And they started November of 2020, so brand new program. The teams include a community paramedic, a behavioral health clinician, and a peer support specialist, somebody who's been there, done that, and so they ride along, and so this is their team. The hours of operation are 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Obviously, we would like to see 24-hour coverage, but that's where they're at right this minute. Sacramento has a mobile crisis support team, and they have, I think it's 5 counties, and they have 4 teams, and so they, I don't know how they split it up, but they have four emergency teams that are operating 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Again, we'd like to see longer hours, but at least they're in place. These backup mental health teams that could really support the police in their effort. Denver, Colorado. They have a support team. Their years of operation since this year, June of 2021, and their teams include a medic and a clinician, and their hours of operation are 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. I don't know I don't know who thought of these hours. But as a social worker, I would think you'd start at 5 and end at 11. But, the social workers went 9 to 5 and then went home, and all the shit happens from 5 to 10. But at any rate, you get the idea. That I think it's just a matter of everybody getting used to the idea that, hey, it's not the police officer running out and doing it anymore. So maybe this is just a way to get your feet wet and see what's working and what isn't working. But it's pretty, to me, it's really exciting. Because since this is already happening, this is not going to be some kind of new, scary thing that the police would have to face or the community would have to face. These programs are already operational. San Diego has a psychiatric emergency response team called PERT, and they're funded through San Diego Health and Human Services, and they include a uniformed armed response with their mental health team. So I'm not sure what kind of car they show up in, but often if it's not a police car, the person who they're going to be dealing with is more receptive than if a police car shows up with lights and they're afraid they're going to get arrested or go to jail or whatever. So hopefully the police officer would be in just a regular car with the mental health team. So the licensed mental health workers, paramedics, specially trained, and law enforcement are part of that team. And the hours of operation is not available 24/7. I'm not sure what that means. The hours of operation is not. But at any rate, they're all working out their hours. Is that the end of that, or is there more?
Yep. That's the end of it.
So I don't know. Somebody else is going to talk about Nevada County and what's going on, and what bug is in my hair, just so it doesn't bite me. One good thing about having spikes is that when the wasps come, they get tangled up in your spikes, and then you can get away. Just so you know that this haircut has been very helpful.
Some of you have probably read in the paper about the Sheriff's Department started a new crisis response team, and it started in December of last year, so it's been running for a while. And Lorraine and I went to meet with Sheriff Moon after the Sage Crawford shooting, because we were wondering where was the crisis team that day. It was a Thursday, and, we felt that the dispatch call should have called, or however they do that, and alerted the crisis team to show up there. For one thing, there was a problem with the dispatch call, and the dispatch call said it was a suspicious circumstance. Well, the 2 people who called in that call said it was a woman in distress with two children and that she needed help. But the dispatcher did not relay that really critical information. So when the officers showed up, I think they just showed up for trouble. And Sage was totally freaked out because a number of things that had happened to her recently. So she thought that they were coming to take her children away. And she just went crazy. Now, our opinion is what if they had been trained correctly according to the police officers' standards and training for de-escalating an event like that, they would have backed up, probably got in their car, called the crisis team, or called a behavioral health negotiator or something, but they kept moving towards her. And the big mistake was the one officer went behind her and tried to tase her, and the taser failed, and that was the big mistake there. So that ended really tragically. And so when Lorraine and I met with Shannon Moon, we said, well, where was the crisis team that day? And she said they were out sick. They were out sick. They work Monday through Friday from 8 to 5. So it's a very limited amount of hours. But then the other shocker was this. There's one trained sheriff's deputy who rides around with a licensed mental health worker paid for by behavioral health. But the deputy is not assigned specifically to the crisis team. He's not dedicated to the crisis team. So he could be out on another call. And I said, well, what happens to the mental health worker then? Who's riding around with the deputy? Oh, well, he just has to go wherever the deputy goes. I said, well, what does he do? And she said, paperwork. That's what she said, paperwork. So I just felt like, if we're going to have crisis response teams, they have to be available every day, whatever hours. But shit happens 24/7. So that's why we think the Cahoots team is the way to go. If we can convince our county government that would be the best thing to do. And the other, unfortunately, thing was the Gabriel Strickland shooting. Same thing, mentally ill. He had just gotten out of jail, and everybody arrived on the scene, the sheriff's deputies first, and they just started yelling and screaming at him. They made no attempt at all to de-escalate that situation. They didn't call for backup or anything. They just kept moving towards him in a threatening manner. So that was really tragic too, and it just showed a real lack of, maybe they were trained, but actually those officers started to get the de-escalation training after that shooting. They hadn't had it before, and they were supposed to have had it the previous year. So, we're finding out a lot of things that are really disturbing, and now we're looking deeply into sheriff's officers training. Now, Shannon Moon said all of our officers are current. We're finding out that they're not current either. So, anyway, that's a big problem, and we're going to address the sheriff's department next. But in Grass Valley, as you know, started a crisis response team. They got a grant for that. It's also not 24/7, but it's more geared to the homeless problem specifically. That's what Chief Gamelgard wanted to do, because they, we obviously have a lot of issues still happening with the homeless over there, and so he has a trained police officer who rides with a clinical social worker from Hospitality House. So that's that team, and they'll go out on calls and see what they can do to get people into services. So I think they're doing a really good job over there. They're doing as good a job as their funding allows, but hopefully that can be expanded on too. So our crisis task force is really wanting these kinds of programs in Nevada County.
Hi, my name's Libby. I have been working within a small grassroots group trying to develop a peer support crisis response team, something that is not really originated within a government structure, but really of the community for the community, because we find that when someone's in a state of crisis, someone who is showing up in a uniform is threatening. It can be frightening. And we feel that, and studies show that when someone is approached by a peer, by someone they can trust, the odds of them receiving help and being able to get an on-ramp to service is much, much more likely. So that's a big part of us. We're just regular people. We're not off the ground yet. This is really like still very much in the works. We're getting trained. We are forming relationships with licensed practitioners and professionals to advise us and be on call. But it's really like, we don't want to be authorities. You know, we want to just meet people where they are so that they're not threatened. So, yeah, we're trained volunteers. We're working with licensed practitioners. And it's really about, you know, educating ourselves so that we're not unconsciously recreating a system of harm. A lot of what's formed in our society is unconscious bias, whether it's racism, homophobia, sexism, patriarchy, capitalism. All these things create a lot of harm, and so we have to look at the root of what puts people in the position of crisis. So we're seeking out training in mental health first. We have a good relationship with the Mental Health First in Sacramento and Oakland. They've been inviting us to their trainings. We're also going to be attending a training that's being put on by Phoebe Bell of Behavioral Health. She's doing like a 6-hour training at the end of September, so a lot of us are going to be attending that. Focusing on harm reduction, Narcan application, de-escalation, and sexual assault response. And just issues that we're finding out that our community really needs, and that the most appropriate way to respond to it. We're striving to recreate a model that doesn't replicate current policing, government, social work, or other agencies. So it's like just peer-to-peer. Understanding the roots of harm, and we don't want to criminalize people. We don't want to stigmatize them or respond in a punitive manner. It really makes the distance between where they are and getting help even further when they feel stigmatized or othered, or there's a power structure over them. So when we call the cops on someone who it's like a non-crisis situation, it really isn't helpful. It actually can like ruin their lives. So that's something we're learning how can we support our community? And like, though we wanted to take on, like we see that this is like a real need, and our group wants to take this on and learn how we can train our volunteers, we're also realizing that we want to educate neighborhoods and communities so that we can all learn how to be of greater service, and how can we alleviate crisis before it reaches like a very escalated point. Because we realize that there's like, I call them like compounding crises. We have, you know, our economy is not doing so great. There's a major housing crisis. It's very expensive. COVID is putting a major strain on all of us and our ability to access resources and our community and our friendships. So we're going to be seeing greater and greater amounts of people pushed to the edge of society. People we love and care about are struggling. And it's not fair to expect police officers to be the first responders to all of these things, and that we need to come up with additional support systems for people. It's like kind of a way of reimagining public safety. The communities that are the most safe are not the ones with the most police, they're the ones with the most resources. That's like, more and more studies show that the communities that have access to housing, food, shelter, safety, being able to secure your belongings, are the ones with the least amount of crisis and the least amount of crime. So less crime happens when people's
Street crime.
Right. When basic
Versus
needs are met,
crime.
yeah, people aren't acting out of desperation when their needs are met. So how can we start thinking about preventing crisis as well. Instead of just slapping band-aids on them all the time, how can we prevent them from occurring? So that's kind of in the nutshell where our group is at. We're just very much in the place of getting trained, getting organized, raising funds. That's also a big part of what we're doing right now. We're trying to develop focus groups so that we know exactly who we are serving, what they need, and how to get our mobile unit up and running. So, and we're calling ourselves Street Care.
I'm going to ask our speakers to come.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Marie, and I'm a mother of a 24-year-old with a severe mental illness. And he's been in 14 facilities since he was 18 years old. And he now lives, has his own apartment and lives in Nevada City. And he walks through town several times a day, and many of you probably have seen him. And I'm also with NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness. I'm on their board. And, you know, we had to call the police a lot of times. And thank goodness, Grass Valley Police Department were amazing with us. We even had a police officer that came to our home afterwards, and after one of the calls, when my son smashed my husband's head into the wall, and he came the next day to check on us. So even though we may not have some of these support systems, they're really trying. They're really, really trying. But what I want to know is because, well, I have my son that has, he has schizophrenia, and then I have a daughter that has bipolar. And what happened in both of those cases is that their illnesses were not recognized by therapists. And there's a lot of therapists that do not understand severe mental illness. And so, Libby, I wanted to ask you, how are you guys, your team, getting trained on this? And are you family members or loved ones, or do some of you have a severe mental illness?
Yes, we have members who have had similar experiences with you that have had to call the police. Some have had a very negative experience, some have had a positive experience, and one of them is in fact a licensed therapist. So we are extremely aware of those exact situations, and it is very delicate and it is very complex, and we are training ourselves to the best of our ability with the resources that we've been able to access. And yes, we've been in contact with NAMI, and I always thought it was NAMI. Yes, we have made contact with them, but and are starting to access some of their resources.
Okay. It was
Invite her.
me that would take the phone call,
Oh, okay.
and I don't remember ever talking to you, so.
I don't think we made a phone call, but I'm sorry, but we have.
Email?
We are.
I get that all.
Okay.
I do all of that.
We are also very much in the beginning phases. We've only been meeting as a group for 6 months, so we are not close to being off the ground. It is just really something we are working hard towards being able to offer.
Because it is really important, those people that, you know, those people that were killed probably did have a severe mental illness, and it's a whole other realm. And services are very, very difficult to get. So it's not an easy fix, not at all. And then I want to tell you that I'm a certified peer family support specialist. I did training through NAMI, so they do have that available, and it is a grant, and it will eventually be certified through the state when California recognizes it. So just to let you know.
Excellent. I would love to get your contact, and thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, I really appreciate that.
So I hope that we've not given you any impression other than we want to better our police presence. We want to better the approach to the public. Sorry, go ahead, and sir.
I'd like to address some of the economic aspects of law enforcement. They seem to be very well equipped. You know, I see that Nevada City Police, for example, just recently have acquired 2 new vehicles, which have every bell and whistle a vehicle can have. They're festooned with every piece of equipment that they can be festooned with. And I'm quite concerned about the allocation of funding. I think it's poorly allocated, abominably allocated, and I've always thought this. Training obviously is of the utmost importance for these people. And how can this be brought about? How can we get the City Council of Nevada City, the County of Nevada County, to reallocate this funding, you know, to training of police officers? And this has been going on a long time. I've lived in this county for 40 years. And when we first arrived here, I nearly lost my life and my whole family to a police officer who was a reserve Nevada City policeman. And I had a 357 Magnum pistol on the back of my head, bouncing on the back of my head at the top of Nevada Street. And my wife was nursing our child. And they said that our car resembled a car which someone fired a shot out of on Ridge Road. And, you know, and my wife got out of the car and saying, "What do you want me to do?" Because I'm on my face on the ground. And I thought I was dead. Literally thought I was dead. I reported this incident to the union, to the Nevada City Independent. Neither one of those would handle it. I talked to the chief of police, showed him that I had written this letter. I finally got on KVMR and read it. And after that, they kind of let me alone. This was a stop that had taken place. It was the final stop of 3 stops that we had received as a family in this particular car. We sold the car. In fact, I had sold the car before this. I had this incident happened, and I was on a test drive because I was going to remedy something for these people who had purchased it. But anyway, it was obvious. I went straight at him. I went to the chief of police, Bill Beard at the time, and he was an extremely corrupt man. And the radio station is what kind of took the heat off of us for a while. So anyway, at that time, and this, one of the guys was a reserve officer. They didn't want to give me their names or anything else, and I knew who they were, and they were reported by me over the air, and it kind of cooled things off a little bit. But obviously, back then, as now, people need to be trained. These people need to be trained. A police officer friend of mine, he's been a sheriff, once told me that the weakest aspect of the jurisprudence system in the United States is the police department. And this guy was a cop. He said, in one split second, a policeman can do more damage than can be remedied, period. So anyway, I just think that the allocation of funds has to go toward the training of these people. Why is the chief of police demanding that every officer in the Nevada City Police Department is trained?
Well, that's definitely at the top of our list of questions. And just to address what you said about the budget, what we try to find out is what types of crime are our police force responding to. And they don't keep records of the types of crime. So what we wanted to the community to kind of look at is the type of crime. Does the budget, does the budget equal, the amount of crime that we have. I mean, are we overspending on cars and equipment and all that stuff if they're just responding to mostly nonviolent crimes? But they don't seem to keep that data, and that's one of the things we want our police chief to start doing. I know Alex Gamelgard's doing it over there, is collecting data on the types of crime, because then he can budget appropriately for that. Maybe we don't need that many officers.
Well, they do a real good job of closing the streets off for
Are
hot
you going to
summer.
respond to that?
Every cop out there doing it. And
Yeah.
they're really efficient.
Well, I just want to say
Yeah.
that it's going to be because of public support and outcry that we're going to get any changes made on the city level. First, we can say, I hope you're all Nevada City, because the changes can happen here, and I hope that they will. I hope our city council will hear us. By the way, we should add that we invited the city council members here tonight to speak and to hear us. I don't see any of them here.
Gary's there.
Oh, are you Gary?
Yep.
Gary Peterson? Oh, sorry, I don't recognize you. All right, great.
I thought you raised your
Okay,
hand,
well,
Gary.
I-
Do you have
I
a question?
No, I have a couple comments and
Okay.
a couple things I'd like to say. I just,
Well, I also
down.
want, wait, let me just finish with the budget
just
issue.
in order, when you're ready.
So we learned that the sheriff's department receives $46 million per year, or at least at this time this year, for their budget. $46 million. Now that covers the jail and it covers what else besides the police force. But $46 million, I don't know what percentage yet that is of the county budget. We're going to be reporting on the sheriff's office our next town hall meeting, which will be September, the fourth Friday in September, which I think is the 24th of September. We'll be reporting this kind of a program, maybe here, on the county sheriff's department. The Nevada City police budget is about, as I understand it, about $2 million of a $4 million overall general budget. Am I right on that? What's that? Oh, you don't have to, because I looked at it. It's about half. So it's about half, or as he said, 46.8% of the budget. So yeah, I think the people, the residents, have power, and we need to show up at these city council meetings. We need to press our city council to, hire police chiefs who will hold the officers accountable for their training and for what, how they spend the money. All right.
Just real quick. I am the newest city council person. The council has all the same questions you have. There's no difference here. We're working really hard to try and understand where we need to go. A couple things I just want to kind of, straighten out a little bit. I have 45 years on the other side of the table in local government, so I don't want to geek on you too much, but I just want to explain the structure a little bit. So where we are in the city council does not hire the chief of police. The city council hires a city manager. The city manager hires the chief of police, certainly with council consultation. But the city manager has to build that team. So we are in the process of replacing a city manager. If you've been paying attention to the city, there's a lot of people gone. And they're gone. And we are looking forward. The most important thing for us at this point is how do we go forward with this? I actually have a better alternative than forcing the council to do things. And that's the idea that maybe we should do them together. We have a survey, a community survey that's going to hit the streets hopefully Monday. We thought we were going to get it out this week. We also, on September 16th, Daniela Fernandez and I will be hosting a Zoom community town hall. We are in the process of collecting information. Ted Steck, the chief of police, is not the chief of police. He is the interim chief of police. Joan Philippe, the city manager, I'll explain the difference, is the city manager is interim. They are temporary, holding the place together, doing analysis until we can fill the positions that the council vacated, that were vacated by departures in the city. So that is happening. One of the things that Ted is doing, you're absolutely right, he's really highly qualified. He's a good guy. He's doing a complete analysis of the department. He's looking at staffing, he's looking at resources, he's looking at all sorts of things, so we have that professional view as well. Really important in helping to make the decisions. Also, in terms of the budget, we don't have a budget right now. Frankly, it's kind of like I'm trying to be nice about this. I've been doing this for 45 years. I couldn't read the budget that we have. We're putting out a city budget that you guys are supposed to read, and somebody who's done those budgets can't read them. We're in the process of completely rebuilding the budget. Should be coming out this month, so that we know down to the penny what we have and where those allocations are. Be happy to talk to you about it.
I'll just comment that I've looked at all of the budgets for those cities. Some of them are really weird.
It's crazy, and everybody's got their own way of doing it, but there are standards and there's codes and all that. It's how it's organized, but it wasn't a useful document. So we need to understand that, and then we can ask the questions. But we have the same questions you do. What should we do with our police department? It's got to change. It's going to need to be rebuilt. We're down several positions. We're down a chief. We're down a lieutenant. We're down several officers. We're just holding it together now. And when we bring that back, what do we bring back? And those are the questions we're trying to answer. For us, this is about going forward to design and create a police department that meets the needs of our community. That's the way it's supposed to work. That's what we're trying to do. We're taking all of the input. We've gotten the letters and information that we've received from your group. That's certainly going into the hopper. We really encourage you to participate in the survey. You'll see the press releases. It'll be on the city website. And on the 16th, when we do the public meeting, to participate in that. We are trying to engage the community in really useful ways. I have a really deep background in community engagement and absolutely believe that we have to do this together. We are in a new world. It's different. It's not going to be the same, and the only way we're going to figure out how to do this is to do that together. So that's where I am.
I have a question, Ken.
You have a question that I may or may not answer, but go ahead.
Well, it's actually not a question.
Ah.
It's actually a request that you have Ted Steck go back over the dispatch records and find out what kinds of calls does Nevada City respond to.
I failed to answer that. At the council's request, every city council meeting now under the consent agenda has a police activity report.
I wasn't able to find that. I've been looking for it.
You have to go into the agenda and you look for it. It's in there, but we started getting them, so they're coming monthly. They should be available.
But I mean, we don't want it monthly. We want to know, by year, I suppose.
Well, so I don't know.
Somebody needs to gather that information.
They're gathering now.
I understand that. I understand that. What we have now is something. I mean, so I've been in a lot of places. Like I said, this is my first rodeo, and I've worked extensively with communities and policing, and I was looking for that report, and I was used to seeing it every council meeting, and it wasn't there. Ted showed up. We made the request. It's now there.
Sure.
So that means that those are being compiled. The other thing about the 911 piece. So most of the 911 goes to the county. We do not have a dispatch. What you get in Nevada City is if you call the number, if you have if there's noise in the park or something like that, that's what you get. For the 911 calls, they go through up here and then to the city.
Right, I know.
Yeah, okay, so that's where mostly the records are. But that's all I got to say. The council's really going to work on this hard. We care as much about it as you do, and we got to get this right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. Appreciate it. I do want to add one thing. There's someone who is part of the group but is on vacation and hadn't had a vacation in a long time. And she constantly reminds us that the police officers are human beings as well. They have mental issues, and sometimes part of the problem that we have with the police is just because they're having problems as well. We need to consider them, and part of the training needs to be, or part of the process of having a good police department is having the mental health support that they need, so that they're going to turn around and treat everyone else properly.
I have a number of concerns and reactions. I too am a social worker.
Uh-oh.
I graduated from the University of Iowa in 1968 with my master's degree. But when did you graduate?
I graduated in 1973.
You're a newbie.
Yes.
I currently own an adult residential facility for developmentally handicapped adults. I should have retired a long time ago, but circumstances haven't let me. I was on the behavioral health crisis team for 15 years here in the county, starting in 1991 until about 2006. I've got some puzzlements from what I've been hearing. When I left the crisis team in '06, there was put in place at that time, so I thought, a crisis worker would be going out with law enforcement in situations like we've been describing. The 2 murders that took place in this county should not have occurred. Those could have been easily de-escalated. I was a psychotherapist for 45 years. I've done a lot of training. I worked at Millhouse for 15 or 12 years, and I did a lot of training out there on de-escalation techniques. Some people got it beautifully. Some people never could understand de-escalation. My concern here is that these police officers who are not trained, that Lorraine pointed out in your article recently, they are more of a danger than they are a help to this community. They don't know how to de-escalate. They don't know how to do crowd control. They don't know how to do anything. In my estimation, they're more dangerous than they are helpful. And I think the city is being put in a liable position, as well as these individual officers, because they're not trained. Yes, they have mental health problems. No question about that. Well, traditionally, it's been understood that a lot of people that go into law enforcement are the same types of personalities that engage in criminal activity. That's nothing new. They get in that position and they think they are the law. Over the past few months, I've had a lot of time to look at videotapes on the internet of police officers acting badly, and it's due to the lack of training. I've seen officers say, "You can't tell me what to do. I can come on this property if I want. I am the law." That's a bunch of bullshit. These officers are not the law. They're there to enforce the law, and they are there to serve, which they're not doing very well. Thank you.
Say it, Bob.
I get stage fright. With Lorraine, I was instrumental with a number of other people in starting a local chapter of the ACLU here in Nevada County. We weren't able to continue it very long, but as a result, I did serve on the ACLU Northern California board of the ACLU, and I continue to be active with the ACLU. And right now, they have a program going. It's been implemented, a little bit related to this. It's been implemented in 21 cities across the nation. One of my concerns in this county has been, especially under Sheriff Royal, the militarization of the Sheriff's Department. You were talking about the financial part of it. A lot of money is being spent needlessly on militarized equipment, which has no place in our community. The ACLU's program has been implemented in 21 cities across the United States, and that is civilian control of police surveillance techniques. We don't have that here. One of the big issues that I was concerned about under Sheriff Royal was the bringing in of the, I can't think of it now. The
Drones.
Pardon?
Drones.
Well, the drones right now, yes.
I think
Yes.
that's not approved, actually. I don't
That
know.
we've got to get rid of those damn drones.
Well, they're here.
Yeah, well, we as citizens we can get rid of them. It was the Stingray,
Oh, yeah.
the Stingray that they brought into this county, which acts as a cell tower, and they can listen in on any of your cell phone calls. They can pick up your cell phone calls and track you. Not to mention the Humvees and the other military equipment that the Sheriff's Department and throughout the area have gotten. Surplus military equipment. We are not the enemy. They are there to serve and protect, in theory. But there's a lot of issues. And once again, my primary issue is that these untrained police officers in Nevada City are going to be more problems than they are going to be helpful. They're putting the city at risk because of the lack of training, and the individual officers are being exposed to liability because they don't know what the hell they're doing. They need the training. That's not an option. It takes 16 months for a cosmetologist to get a license in this state. It takes, what, 6 weeks or so?
It's 664 hours. I think that comes.
664 hours of training, and you can carry a gun and shoot people.
And you only have to have a high school education.
Yeah.
Be 18 years old. Yeah, the bar is really low for how to become an officer.
Yeah, as mental health workers, Tara and I, we've had 6 years of formal training, and then we have to get 40 hours, 20 hours every year. Continuing training in order to keep our license. And they won't even give us a gun.
Yeah, I need a gun.
So, anyway, I guess that's mainly what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
There you go. Comments, questions?
Say that I'm a merchant in Nevada City for 40 years, and I just do not want you to forget about asking us what goes on with the police.
Yes.
All the shiny cars, and there's nobody on the street. Could be Mayberry. They could be walking and meeting us. 40 years, and this has really never happened. So this is, I think, the answer. It's personal, getting to know each other, trusting one another. And
Can you tell us what the merchants' concerns or complaints are about the?
I'm just hoping that the survey goes out to us as well. I can just speak for myself. During the COVID crisis and the mandate, we could not get them to do anything with the unmasking, the smoking cannabis, anything. We couldn't get them to walk on the street after phone call asking that they please be a presence, because we had the 4 o'clock light up. I mean, it was clockwork. And there was problems, and we just could not get their attention. And on and on. I just am speaking for myself and what I saw and how frustrated we pay a compliance officer. She does nothing for us. Whoever is paying her, that is such a waste. So it was part of the COVID money that came down. And so, at any rate, thank you for the work you're doing, all of you. It's so needed. This whole world needs this kind of thing right now, or our culture needs it anyway. Thank you.
I just want to say one more thing.
Okay.
You know, I know, like Bob, you talking, or you, that, you know, I know, like past, you look at past, but if I went just on the past, we used to live in the county, my very first crisis call, I had the sheriffs come to our house. My son was trying to jump out of the car. He was trying to jump out of his window, and they wouldn't even take him to the hospital when crisis told me. Nevada City Police, they told him that you can get rid of your parents. You don't have to live with your parents. And so the thing is that we can go by the old stuff, or we can go and join them and try to look to the future. And that's how I like to look at it. The sheriff department isn't the same sheriff department that I experienced 6 years ago. It isn't the same. And what I hear of Nevada City Police, it's changed too. So we do need to look more at the future and to try to push them into the future. And the other thing I wanted to say about the man in the back without a house is that my son, he says, I am not ill. And he hates the term mental illness, and so do I. He has a brain disease or a brain disorder. And that's the problem right now, especially with mental illness, is that we're making it into a whole different thing instead of it's our body. Their brain has a disorder, but somehow we take the brain out and it's a whole other entity. So, you know, we just have to be careful of all of those terms as we're moving ahead. Like you say, you know, we need to have more of these conversations that we're trying to be more current with everything that we're doing and words that come out of our mouths. So, anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah.